Deep beneath the pale glow of a sickly moon, there exists a city that should not be. Yharnam, a sprawling metropolis of Gothic spires and Victorian grandeur, where cobblestone streets wind through layers of architecture built upon the bones of civilizations long dead. The city stands as a monument to hubris, to the dangerous pursuit of knowledge, and to the terrible price humanity pays when it dares to commune with forces beyond mortal comprehension. This is not merely a tale of monsters and hunters, of beasts prowling fog-shrouded alleyways. This is the story of a city that reached for divinity and found only damnation. When you first arrive in Yharnam as a hunter, the city reveals itself in fragments, in glimpses through narrow windows and half-heard whispers behind locked doors. The architecture itself tells a story, Victorian elegance twisted into something sinister. Towering cathedrals pierce the night sky like accusatory fingers pointing toward indifferent gods. Narrow streets create labyrinthine passages that seem designed to confuse and disorient. The buildings lean inward, oppressive and watchful, as though the city itself were alive and aware of your intrusion. Lamplight flickers against walls stained with substances best left unexamined, and everywhere, the smell of blood and incense mingles in the air. The city is built in layers, quite literally. The upper reaches House Cathedral Ward and the domains of the Healing Church, pristine and proud in their elevation. Below that spreads central Yharnam, where the common folk once lived their lives in relative normalcy. And deeper still lies Old Yharnam, a valley district that was set ablaze and abandoned, its streets now patrolled only by beasts and one steadfast hunter who refuses to let the old nightmare be disturbed. This vertical construction mirrors the city's social hierarchy and its descent into madness. The higher you climb, the closer you get to those who believed themselves elevated. The deeper you delve, the older the secrets become. Yharnam's reputation spread far beyond its boundaries. It was known as a place of medical miracles, where a mysterious blood ministration could cure any ailment, heal any wound, grant strength and vitality to the weak and dying. Pilgrims came from across the world, desperate travelers seeking salvation in Yharnam's famed blood healing. The city welcomed them with open arms and the promise of transformation. What those pilgrims didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that Yharnam's miracle cure carried within it the seeds of a plague that would transform its populace into the very beasts they now hunted through the streets. The streets themselves tell stories if you know how to read them. Every mob of citizens clutching torches and pitchforks, every beast crucified and set ablaze as a warning, every locked door with frightened whispers behind it, speaks to a city in the throes of transformation. The citizens have turned paranoid, seeing potential beasts in every stranger, every neighbor who acts strangely. They hunt at night, not out of bravery, but out of terror, knowing that anyone could be the next to transform, that the person standing beside you wielding a torch might be the very monster you're hunting by the next moon. But the story of Yharnam doesn't begin with the city as we find it. To understand how this place fell so catastrophically, we must descend into the earth itself, into the sprawling network of chalice dungeons that predate Yharnam by countless generations. We must travel back to a time when another civilization walked these lands, superhuman beings who carved vast labyrinths beneath the surface and made communion with entities that existed beyond human comprehension. We must begin with the Pthumerians. The Pthumerian civilization stands as both precursor and warning to everything that would follow in Yharnam. These were not ordinary humans. Descriptions paint them as superhuman beings, tall and gaunt, with pale skin that had a grayish, corpse-like quality. Their faces were locked in permanent expressions, mouths agape as if frozen in eternal awe or horror. Most distinctive were their eyes, solid black orbs without pupils, windows into minds that had gazed upon truths that transformed them fundamentally. This was the mark of those who had achieved what they called the Eldritch Truth, contact with the Great Ones. The Pthumerians carved out massive underground labyrinths, tomb complexes of staggering scale and complexity. These weren't simple burial chambers. They were sacred spaces, tombs of the gods, designed to house and honor the Great Ones themselves. The architecture of these dungeons speaks to an advanced civilization with knowledge of engineering and construction that seems impossible for their age. Vast chambers supported by stone pillars stretch into darkness. Ritual spaces decorated with serpentine patterns and mysterious symbols line the walls. Traps and mechanisms guard the deeper sanctums, protecting secrets that were meant to remain undisturbed. Walking through the chalice dungeons today, you can still sense the purpose behind their construction. These weren't places meant for the living. The passages are too narrow in some places, too vast in others. The ritual chambers suggest ceremonies we can barely comprehend. And everywhere, there are the Watchers, mysterious hooded figures who still guard these tombs, still perform their duties even though their civilization has long since fallen. They ring bells to summon other guardians. They wield weapons with practiced precision, and they show a discipline that suggests they're following orders given to them generations ago by masters who are now dust. At the heart of Pthumerian society stood their queens, for their monarch was traditionally a woman who bore a name of significance. The most important of these was Queen Yharnam herself, the woman for whom the later city would be named. She was more than just a ruler. She was seen as the foremost communicator with the Great Ones, a bridge between the human and the divine. Her blood was considered particularly potent, so powerful that to be granted, it was viewed as the highest honor. Pthumerians would drink deeply of their queen's blood in rituals of communion, binding themselves to her and through her to the cosmic entities that ruled their faith. Queen Yharnam's story is one of the most tragic in all of Bloodborne's lore. When you encounter her throughout the game, she appears as a ghostly figure in a white wedding dress stained with blood, particularly around her abdomen. Her hands are bound in chains, and her veil conceals a face marked by sorrow. The wedding dress is significant. In the world of Bloodborne, marriage held special meaning. According to the ring of betrothal found in the chalice dungeons, in the age of the Great Ones, wedlock was a blood contract, only permitted to those slated to bear a special child. Yharnam was bound in such a contract with Uiden, a formless Great One, and from this union came Murgo. But this was no willing partnership. The blood on her dress, the chains on her wrists, the circumstances of Murgo's birth all point to violence. The child was taken from Queen Yharnam before birth, ripped from her womb in what appears to have been a ritual sacrifice. The purpose of this atrocity becomes clearer as we progress through the game. Murgo's cries were needed to draw the moon closer to the world, to attract the attention of the Great Ones and make contact with them. The baby's anguished wailing became a beacon, a lure cast into the cosmic void, and Queen Yharnam was left to wander as a specter, forever bound to the nightmare of her child's suffering, unable to move on, unable to find peace. When you finally confront Queen Yharnam in the deepest chalice dungeon, Pthumeri Hill, she's still pregnant, still bound, still fighting to protect the child that was stolen from her. The battle is heartbreaking. She wields a dagger, her movements graceful despite her chains, and throughout the fight, you can hear Murgo crying, the infant's wails paralyzing you at times, as though the child is trying to protect its mother even from beyond death, even from whatever nightmare it now inhabits. When her health drops low enough, she empowers her dagger with her own blood, making it resemble a sword, fighting with desperate fury to protect what was taken from her so long ago. The Pthumerian civilization did not endure. Like all who came before and all who would come after, their communion with the Great Ones led to their downfall. The evidence suggests they fell victim to a beast scourge, not unlike the one that would later consume Yharnam. The dungeons are filled with twisted creatures and malformed beings. The labyrinth madmen, humans who have lost all reason and simply crawl through the darkness, could represent what became of ordinary Pthumerians. The beast-possessed souls, grotesque creatures wreathed in flames, might show what happened to those who tried to fight the transformation. The civilization that once thrived there sealed itself away in the labyrinths, standing guard over the sleeping Great Ones, protecting their terrible secret from the surface world. They became caretakers of tombs and guardians of cosmic horrors, their once great society reduced to an endless vigil in the darkness beneath the earth. The Watchers still maintain their posts, the descendants still guard the deeper sanctums, and somewhere in those depths, the Great Ones they served continue to slumber, dreaming dreams that warp reality itself. But knowledge of the Pthumerians and their labyrinths was not lost forever. Centuries would pass, new civilizations would rise above the old, and eventually, scholars would rediscover the tombs. Among these scholars were those who would form an institution called Byrgenwerth, a place of learning that would inadvertently set in motion all the horrors that Yharnam would come to know. The story of Byrgenwerth is the story of academic ambition unchecked, of brilliant minds convinced that forbidden knowledge was worth any price. Byrgenwerth was established as a university, a place where great thinkers could pursue learning in an atmosphere removed from the concerns of common society. It sat in a peaceful, secluded location overlooking Moonside Lake, the perfect environment for contemplation and study. The building itself, though now in ruins, still maintains a certain dignity. The lunarium on the upper floor, with its intricate astronomical device, speaks to the scholar's interest in the cosmos. The library, though ransacked and damaged, still contains books and scrolls that hint at the depth of research conducted here. The institution attracted scholars who were interested in pushing the boundaries of human knowledge, in understanding the cosmos and humanity's place within it. They studied history, archaeology, astronomy, seeking to elevate human thought to higher planes of existence. It was an institution built on noble aspirations, guided by the principle that through understanding, humanity could transcend its limitations. The Byrgenwerth student uniform, still worn by some of the Garden of Eyes you encounter, emphasizes knowledge and wisdom, showing the institution's original values. At the head of this institution stood Provost Willem, later to be known as Master Willem. He was a man of considerable intellect and means, wealthy enough to maintain the university and influential enough to attract the brightest minds to his cause. He had lifelong manservants whose loyalty extended even into madness, suggesting he came from a family of significant standing. Willem had a motto that would become central to Byrgenwerth's philosophy, and ironically would be ignored to disastrous effect by his most promising student. That motto was simple: fear the old blood. Willem understood, perhaps through intuition or perhaps through early research, that the blood of gods carried inherent dangers. He believed the path to human ascension lay not in the blood but in the mind, in gaining insight and lining one's brain with eyes to see the world as the great ones saw it. "We are thinking on the basest of planes," he once said. "What we need are more eyes." This philosophy led to some disturbing practices. Willem cultivated eyes on the cerebral patients at Byrgenwerth, conducting experiments that were unethical even by the standards of the time, all in pursuit of this transcendent vision. The breakthrough that would change everything came when Byrgenwerth's tomb prospectors, scholars who ventured into the recently rediscovered chalice dungeons, found something extraordinary. Deep within the labyrinth, in the tombs carved out by the Pthumerians, they discovered a holy medium, an ancient substance that would come to be known as the Old Blood. This blood possessed remarkable properties. It could heal wounds, cure diseases, grant strength and vitality. It seemed to be the answer to all of humanity's physical limitations, a miraculous panacea that could elevate the species. The discovery must have been electrifying for the scholars. Here, in these ancient tombs, they had found what appeared to be a divine substance, blood that could literally transform the human condition. The possibilities seemed endless. No more disease, no more weakness, no more death from wounds or illness. It must have seemed like the answer to every prayer, the key to unlocking human potential. But Willem saw the danger immediately. He had studied the ruins. He had seen what became of the Pthumerians, how their civilization had fallen to a beast scourge. He understood that the old blood, for all its benefits, carried within it a corruption that transformed humans into monsters. The evidence was there in the dungeons for anyone willing to see it. Laurence, another ancient civilization that had consumed the old blood, had similarly fallen to a beast plague. The Laurence silver beasts you encounter in the chalice dungeons, massive wolf-like creatures with silver fur and devastating electrical attacks, showed what happened to those who drank too deeply. The pattern was clear. Blood ministration led inevitably to beasthood. Willem advocated for caution, for pursuing ascension through other means, through the accumulation of insight and the cultivation of eyes on the brain to achieve higher understanding. He wanted to think like the great ones, not become monsters in a failed attempt to equal them. Fear the old blood, he warned his students again and again. Evolution without courage is mere devolution. Among Willem's students was a young scholar named Laurence, perhaps his closest and most brilliant pupil. Laurence looked at the old blood and saw not danger, but opportunity. He believed that with proper control, with the right techniques and rituals, the healing properties of the blood could be harnessed safely. He was convinced that the blood was the key to humanity's next evolutionary step, the medium through which mankind could ascend to the level of the great ones. Where Willem preached caution, Laurence saw unlimited potential. Where Willem advocated for fear, Laurence felt only ambition. The philosophical divide between master and student grew until it could no longer be bridged. Willem wanted to pursue insight, to line the brain with eyes, to achieve transcendence through understanding. Laurence wanted to use the blood, to take what the gods had and make it humanity's own. The two approaches were fundamentally incompatible. One required patience, meditation, slow accumulation of cosmic knowledge. The other promised immediate results, tangible healing, physical transformation. For an ambitious young scholar, the choice must have seemed obvious. In what Willem would later call a betrayal, Laurence made the decision to leave Byrgenwerth and pursue his vision independently. The moment of departure is captured in one of the game's most important cutscenes, revealed when you examine Laurence's skull in the Grand Cathedral. Willem sits in his chair, aged and weary, as Laurence stands before him, explaining his decision to leave. "Master Willem, I've come to bid you farewell," Laurence says, his voice filled with determination. Willem responds with resignation and sorrow, already knowing what his student intends. "Oh, I know. You think now to betray me." "No, but you will never listen," Laurence replies, defensive, trying to justify his choice. "I tell you, I will not forget our adage." And Willem, knowing he cannot change his student's mind, offers one final warning, words that will prove prophetic. "We are born of the blood, made men by the blood, undone by the blood. Our eyes are yet to open. Fear the old blood." Laurence would make his promise. He would tell Willem he would remember to fear the blood. But promises made in moments of departure are easily forgotten in the flush of success, and Laurence's success would be spectacular, at least initially. He left Byrgenwerth and traveled to what would become Yharnam, bringing with him other scholars who shared his vision, including Mikolash, who would later found the School of Mensis. Gehrman, who knew both Willem and Laurence from this period, would become associated with Laurence's new venture as the man who would establish the hunt. Together, these individuals would create an institution that would dwarf Byrgenwerth in influence and power, the Healing Church. The Healing Church was built on the promise of blood ministration. Laurence and his followers demonstrated the healing properties of the old blood to the people of Yharnam, curing diseases that had been considered incurable, healing injuries that should have been fatal, granting strength to the weak and dying. The results were undeniable and miraculous. A person on their deathbed could receive blood ministration and be walking within hours. Diseases that had plagued families for generations could be cured with a single treatment. The elderly could regain the vigor of their youth. Word spread across the known world that in Yharnam there existed a cure for all that ailed humanity. Pilgrims flooded into the city, desperate for healing, willing to undergo the blood ministration to save themselves or their loved ones. They came from every corner of the known world, traveling for months, selling everything they owned for the chance at Yharnam's miracle cure. The church grew wealthy beyond measure, becoming not just a religious institution, but the effective governing body of Yharnam itself. Laurence became the first vicar of the Healing Church, its founder and spiritual leader. The church's hierarchy was relatively informal in its early days, without the rigid structure of titles and ranks. Laurence was simply the vicar, the head of the institution, and his word was law. The Grand Cathedral became the center of the church's power, a massive structure that dominated the skyline, visible from every part of the city. Inside, the cathedral was filled with symbols of the church's dual nature, Christian imagery mixed with references to the Great Ones, creating a unique theology that worshipped cosmic entities while maintaining the trappings of traditional religion. The church's teachings combined elements of scientific research with religious worship. They revered the Great Ones, seeking to make contact with them and understand their cosmic significance. But unlike true religious devotion, the church's worship was instrumental. They didn't serve the great ones out of faith, but sought to harness their power, to learn their secrets, to ultimately equal or surpass them. It was religion as a means to an end, faith weaponized in the pursuit of transcendence. The church based its uniforms on those worn at Byrgenwerth, a deliberate echo of the institution's academic origins. But where Byrgenwerth's uniforms emphasized knowledge and scholarly pursuit, the Healing Church's version emphasized pretension and authority. The Byrgenwerth student uniform states, "The Healing Church has its roots in Byrgenwerth and naturally borrows heavily from its uniform design." The focus not on knowledge or thought, but on pure pretension would surely bring Master Willem to despair, if only he knew. This shift in emphasis, this move from authentic scholarship to institutional control, was one of the first signs of the corruption that would consume the church from within. As the church grew, so did its need for protection and enforcement. The scholars who delved into the chalice dungeons encountered fierce and violent creatures. The citizens who received blood ministration sometimes showed disturbing side effects, transformations that needed to be dealt with discreetly. There were secrets that needed protecting, knowledge that couldn't be allowed to spread to the common populace. The church needed warriors, and so the institution of the hunters was born, formalized, and expanded beyond its humble origins. The first hunter, the man who established the techniques and philosophy that would define all who followed, was Gehrman. By the time the Healing Church rose to prominence, Gehrman was already hunting beasts, having noticed their presence before others recognized the scope of the problem. His garb tells us that, by making adjustments to his everyday clothing, Gehrman hoped to hunt the abhorrent in relative comfort and safety. He equipped himself by adapting what he already had, creating what would become the iconic hunter's garb, practical, mobile, designed for quick movement and brutal efficiency. His weapon of choice was the burial blade, a trick weapon that could transform from a curved sword into a full scythe, combining elegance with lethality. The weapon itself tells a story. It's described as the first trick weapon and was wielded by Gehrman, the first hunter, a curved sword that transforms into a scythe when extended. It allowed Gehrman to fight at multiple ranges, to adapt to different situations, to hunt with both precision and sweeping strikes. The scythe form in particular became his signature, earning him recognition as the hunter who wielded death itself. Gehrman established the first hunter's workshop in an old building that overlooked the city. The location was strategic, positioned between what would become Old Yharnam and Yahar Ghul, allowing quick access to trouble spots. The workshop became both a training facility and Gehrman's personal residence, a place where the lonely work of hunting could be conducted away from civilian eyes. The building still stands, accessible through a hidden path in the Healing Church workshop, though now it's abandoned, filled with memories and dust. Inside the old workshop, you can find evidence of Gehrman's life and work. His wheelchair sits empty. The doll he created rests lifeless. And throughout the building, there are tools, weapons, and notes that speak to the methodical nature of his hunt. This was where the first hunters were trained, where the techniques that would define generations of hunters were developed and refined. Gehrman trained students in the art of the hunt, teaching them his techniques of quick dodges, transformation attacks with trick weapons, and the use of firearms not as primary weapons, but as tools for creating openings through parries and staggers. The hunter's approach to combat was fundamentally different from traditional warriors. Where knights wore heavy armor and relied on shields, hunters wore light clothing and used mobility as their defense. Where soldiers fought in formations, hunters worked alone or in small groups. Where traditional weapons were simple and straightforward, trick weapons transformed mid-combat, allowing for varied attack patterns and strategic flexibility. The quickening, the hunter's characteristic dodge, became the foundation of their fighting style. Move, strike, move again, never stay still long enough for the beast to predict your location. Among Gehrman's students, one stood out above all others. Lady Maria. She was a skilled hunter, perhaps even surpassing her teacher in pure combat ability. Gehrman held her in the highest regard, though his feelings went beyond simple respect for a talented apprentice. He was possessed of what the lore describes as a curious mania toward her, an intense infatuation that he could never properly express. Gehrman was shy around women, awkward in his affections. You can find a book in his workshop titled How to Pick Up Fair Maidens, suggesting he struggled with expressing his feelings. And Maria was a consummate professional who seemed unaware of or uninterested in her mentor's feelings. Maria's fighting style was unique among hunters. While others relied heavily on their firearms, Maria preferred a more direct approach. According to her weapon, the rakuyo, she had great admiration for Gehrman and for his blades, but with awareness of such frightful stoicism, she could not bring herself to carry a firearm. Instead, she used her weapon, the rakuyo, with devastating speed and precision, favoring a more elegant, personal style of combat. The rakuyo, a trick weapon that splits into dual blades, allowed for rapid combinations and flowing, dance-like movements. She embodied the hunter's ethos of a dirge of farewell, wishing only that her prey rest in peace, never again to awaken to another harrowing nightmare. Gehrman's burial blade describes this philosophy. A trick weapon wielded by Gehrman, the first hunter, buried at the foot of the tree where he once directed hunters. A masterpiece that defined the entire array of weapons crafted at the workshop. Its blade is forged with siderite, a rare mineral from the heavens that is said to possess its own will and to have appeared on this world through a great meteor. There was a nobility to this approach, a sense that hunting was a necessary burden rather than something to be enjoyed, a mercy granted to those who had lost their humanity. But the work of hunters wasn't limited to combating beasts in Yharnam's streets. The Healing Church had broader ambitions, research that required specimens and materials not readily available in the city. They needed to understand the Great Ones more fully, to study their biology, to harvest their power for the Church's use. And so hunters were sometimes dispatched on missions that had nothing to do with protecting citizens and everything to do with serving the Church's more sinister purposes. One such mission would haunt the hunters involved for the remainder of their lives and beyond. The Healing Church learned of a fishing hamlet, a remote coastal village where a Great One had washed ashore. The villagers had taken to worshipping this being, whom they called Kos, or, as some say, Kosm. When Kos died, her corpse remained on the beach, and the villagers continued their devotion, believing that she blessed them even in death. The church saw an opportunity. Here was a Great One, dead and helpless, ready to be studied. Based on the evidence found in the hunter's nightmare and the presence of old hunters at the site, it appears the church sent their scholars and hunters to the hamlet to harvest what they needed. What followed was a massacre. Hunters descended upon the fishing hamlet with ruthless efficiency. The evidence suggests that both Gehrman and Maria were among those who participated, given Maria's later trauma and the weapons found at the site. The rakuyo's description tells us it was discovered at the bottom of a well, where the rats of the fishing hamlet sip foul black blood, evidence perhaps of Maria's refusal to accept blood healing. The scholars performed horrific experiments on the villagers, harvesting their eyes for study, conducting cruel research in their pursuit of understanding the Great Ones. The connection between the villagers and Kos had begun to change them, granting them eyes on the inside, making them valuable subjects for the church's research. Men, women, even children were subjected to unspeakable torments, all in the name of enlightenment. The snail women, the strange creatures you fight in the hamlet, appear to be villagers in the process of transformation. The large-headed patients suggest forced evolution, bodies unable to handle the cosmic insight being forced upon them. It was systematic brutality disguised as science. The desecration reached its pinnacle when they turned their attention to Kos herself. The Great One's corpse was violated, cut open, and her unborn child was ripped from her womb. That child, known as the Orphan of Kos, would become a being of pure rage and sorrow, its cries echoing across dimensions. When you finally confront the orphan in the hunter's nightmare, its screams are anguished and vengeful, the sound of a child that never got to be born, that was torn from its mother before it even took its first breath. The fishing hamlet, in its anguish and despair, called out for vengeance. A curse was placed upon the hunters, a terrible malediction that would see them drawn into an eternal nightmare when they became drunk with blood, condemned to hunt forever in a twisted reflection of the waking world. The hunter's nightmare became a prison for those who participated in the hamlet's destruction, forcing them to relive their sins for eternity, forever hunting, forever violent, forever trapped. Lady Maria was devastated by what she had witnessed and participated in. The Fishing Hamlet massacre broke something fundamental within her. She threw away her beloved rakuyo, casting the weapon into a well as though trying to rid herself of the memory of what she had done with it. She could no longer continue as a hunter, could no longer participate in the work she once saw as noble. The evidence suggests she eventually took her own life, though the exact circumstances remain unclear. What is certain is that her death deeply affected Gehrman, who loved her despite never being able to express it properly. In his grief, Gehrman created a doll in Maria's likeness, a perfect replica of her appearance. He kept mementos of her in his workshop, a hair ornament carefully preserved in a cupboard. The doll was a work of exquisite craftsmanship, clothed in fine attire, maintained with obsessive care. According to the small hair ornament, one of the precious adornments that she cherished, perhaps a gift from Gehrman, the first hunter. The doll stood as a testament to Gehrman's feelings for Maria and his inability to let her go even in death. This doll, crafted by his own hands in the waking world, would later become something more, something alive, when Gehrman's fate became bound to the hunter's dream. While the hunters dealt with beasts and the church's darker missions, the institution itself was expanding its reach and ambition. Different factions emerged within the healing church, each with its own focus and methodology. This wasn't a coordinated effort, but rather a natural result of the church's growing power and influence. Different groups of clerics pursued different approaches to achieving communion with the Great Ones, sometimes in cooperation, sometimes in competition. The choir was perhaps the most elite of these factions, an upper echelon of the healing church that sought direct communication with the Great Ones. They discovered a being called Ebrietas, the daughter of the cosmos, left behind in the depths beneath Cathedral Ward. The circumstances of this discovery remain mysterious. The Altar of Despair, where Ebrietas resides, suggests she was abandoned or forgotten, left alone while other Great Ones departed or were killed. Rather than harming Ebrietas, the choir sought to befriend her, to learn from her, to use her as a bridge to higher understanding. The relationship between the choir and Ebrietas appears to have been, in some ways, genuine. The Great Lake Rune tells us, "The augur of Ebrietas is a member of the choir and one of the Great One's closest advisors. The secrets of the cosmos may be within reach. Ebrietas taught them to use cosmic powers, granted them insight into the nature of reality, helped them develop spells like A Call Beyond and Augur of Ebrietas that channeled the power of the Great Ones directly. In return, the choir worshipped her, protected her, and sought to understand her cosmic perspective. But the choir's research was far from benevolent. They conducted experiments on unwanted children, orphans taken from Yharnam's streets. These children were subjected to terrible procedures designed to transform them into what the church called celestial emissaries, beings that resembled the kin of the Great Ones. Whether the choir discovered this transformation process in the chalice dungeons or invented it themselves remains unclear, but the experiments succeeded in their horrific way. The children did transform, losing their humanity to become alien creatures with enlarged heads and grotesque bodies. The orphanage, located in the upper cathedral ward, stands as testament to these crimes. Inside, you can find the celestial emissary boss, surrounded by smaller celestial beings. These were once children, taken from the streets, experimented upon, transformed into something inhuman. One of them appears to have achieved some form of transcendence, becoming or merging with a Great One. But at what cost? The orphanage key tells us, "Key to the orphanage, birthplace of the choir." The orphanage, shadowed by the Grand Cathedral, was a place of scholarship and experimentation, where young orphans became potent, unseen thinkers for the healing church. The choir locked these creations away in the upper cathedral ward, hiding the evidence of their atrocities from the world. Another faction, the School of Mensis, took a different approach to contacting the Great Ones. Led by Mikolash, one of the original Byrgenwerth scholars who had left with Laurence, The school of Mensis sought to perform a grand ritual that would summon a great one directly into the waking world. They worked from Yahargul, the unseen village, a part of Yharnam that operated in secret, conducting experiments that were too extreme even for the healing church to openly endorse. Yahargul itself is a fascinating and horrifying place. The architecture is similar to other parts of Yharnam, but there's something wrong about it, something that makes it feel like a reflection rather than a real place. The kidnappers who prowl the streets, the bell-ringing women who perform dark rituals, the corpse piles that stir with unholy life, all of it suggests this was a place where the boundary between reality and nightmare had grown dangerously thin even before the blood moon descended. The Mensis ritual required the cries of a newborn Great One to work. The connection between their ritual and Murgo, the stolen child of Queen Yharnam, becomes apparent when you reach the nightmare of Mensis. The scholars of Mensis created a nightmare realm, dragging part of reality itself into a twisted reflection where thought and dream became tangible. At the heart of this nightmare lies Murgo, attended by the wet nurse, the child's cries echoing through the realm. These cries drew the moon closer, thinning the boundary between the waking world and the realm of the Great Ones. The ritual setup in Yahargul gives us clues about how this was accomplished. The re-dead corpses, stitched together from multiple bodies, seem to be failed attempts at creating vessels for Great Ones. The one reborn, the horrific boss creature made from countless corpses and attended by bell-ringing women, could represent their closest success. It's a grotesque parody of life, an attempt to create something divine from profane materials, and it fails spectacularly, becoming merely monstrous rather than transcendent. But performing such a ritual came at a terrible cost. The members of the school of Mensis died in the attempt, their bodies left slumped in their chairs in the Advent Plaza, minds transported to the nightmare they had created. When you find them in Yahargul, they're just husks, empty shells while their consciousness experiences the nightmare. The ritual succeeded in contacting a Great One, but not in the way they had hoped. The brain of Mensis, a horrific cosmic entity of immense power, manifested in their nightmare. Its mere presence was enough to inflict frenzy on anyone who looked upon it, driving observers mad with cosmic revelation. The scholars had reached out to touch divinity and found themselves consumed by it. As the church's various factions pursued their research, the consequences of blood ministration were becoming impossible to ignore. The beast scourge that Willem had warned about was spreading through Yharnam. Those who received blood ministration, particularly those who received it repeatedly or in large quantities, began to change. The transformation was gradual at first. They would become aggressive, paranoid, seeing threats where none existed. Their physical forms would begin to alter, limbs elongating, hair growing thick across their bodies. Some transformations progressed faster than others, but the end result was always the same: humanity lost, replaced by a beast driven only by hunger and rage. The process of becoming a beast follows a recognizable pattern, one you can observe throughout Yharnam. It begins with the mind. The victim becomes irritable, quick to anger, suspicious of everyone around them. They start seeing other people as threats, as potential beasts themselves. This is when they're still recognizably human, when they can still hold a torch or wield a weapon alongside their neighbors in the hunt. But the paranoia grows, the anger intensifies, until they can no longer distinguish friend from foe. Then come the physical changes. Their arms begin to lengthen, fingers extending into claws. Hair sprouts across their bodies in thick, matted patches. Their faces start to elongate, jaws growing to accommodate fangs that push through their gums. Some transformations manifest as wolf-like features, creating the scourge beasts that prowl the streets. Others become more bestial and distorted, losing all human characteristics. The variety in transformations suggests that different individuals react differently to the old blood, or perhaps that different types of blood create different types of beasts. Old Yharnam, the lower district of the city, was hit particularly hard by the beast scourge. The reasons for this remain a matter of interpretation. Some scholars of Yharnam's history point to the possibility that this area was where blood ministration was first widely distributed, making it ground zero for the transformation plague. Others note the presence of a substance called ashen blood, a mysterious ailment that ravaged the district before the beast scourge became apparent. The antidote item description provides crucial information. Small medicinal tablets that counteract poison, used to treat ashen blood, the baffling sickness that ravaged old Yharnam long ago. These tablets only provide short-term relief. The ashen blood ailment eventually triggered the spread of the beastly scourge. This suggests that ashen blood and the beast scourge are related, though whether this means ashen blood directly caused transformations or simply created conditions that led to increased blood ministration remains unclear. The poisonous nature of the beasts in Old Yharnam, particularly the female beast patients, could support either interpretation. What is certain is that Old Yharnam became a nightmare of beasts and transforming citizens. The streets filled with scourge beasts. The citizens, desperate and terrified, tried to fight back, tried to contain the transformations. But the plague spread faster than they could handle. People they knew, people they loved, were becoming monsters before their eyes. The church watched this unfold and made a terrible decision. The church's response was decisive and brutal. They declared Old Yharnam a lost cause and made the decision to burn it. Hunters were sent in to eliminate any beasts they could find, and then the entire district was set ablaze. Fire swept through the streets, consuming buildings, beasts, and any citizens who hadn't yet completed their transformation. The conflagration was meant to sterilize the area, to prevent the scourge from spreading further. When you visit Old Yharnam in the game, you can still see the evidence of this burning. Charred corpses hang from posts and walls. Buildings stand as blackened shells. The very air smells of old smoke and death. But burning Old Yharnam didn't stop the beast plague. It merely drove it underground, scattered it to other parts of the city, and created a horrific precedent for how the church would deal with problems that became too large to manage quietly. The note you find in Old Yharnam captures the desperation and horror of that final night. The red moon hangs low, and beasts rule the streets. Are we left no other choice than to burn it all to cinders? It's a question that echoes through Yharnam's history. When faced with a problem you can't solve, do you destroy everything to stop it from spreading? One hunter, Jura, participated in the burning of Old Yharnam as a young man. He fought alongside other hunters, slaying beasts without mercy, believing he was protecting Yharnam from a terrible threat. But over time, as he saw the beasts up close, as he understood that these creatures had once been human, something changed in his perspective. Jura came to see the beasts not as monsters to be destroyed, but as victims of the church's ambitions, tragic figures who deserved rest rather than further violence. He took up position in Old Yharnam, alone, protecting the beasts from new hunters who came seeking to prove themselves or simply to slaughter what they saw as inhuman abominations. When you meet Jura, he's positioned on top of a tower with a Gatling gun, ready to shoot anyone who tries to enter the district. His warning is clear. You there, hunter. Didn't you see the warning? Turn back at once. Old Yharnam, burned and abandoned by men, is now home only to beasts. They are of no harm to those above. Turn back, or the hunter will face the hunt. He's willing to kill other hunters to protect the beasts, showing how completely his perspective has shifted. The burning of Old Yharnam forced the church to expand its hunting operations. Gehrman's workshop, while effective, was too small and too traditional for the scale of the problem the church now faced. They needed hunters who could function both as warriors and as researchers, people who could study the beasts even as they destroyed them. And so the church established a new workshop, placing it under the leadership of Ludwig, a highly skilled cleric who had shown exceptional ability in combat. Ludwig represented a new generation of hunters. Where Gehrman had hunted with precision and technique, Ludwig brought raw power and unwavering faith. He wielded heavy weapons, particularly his signature sword, and later would wield the Holy Moonlight Sword, a weapon of tremendous power. According to the Holy Moonlight Sword's description, this is a legendary sword that once belonged to Ludwig, the first hunter of the church. When the blade is imbued with moonlight, it emits a brilliant glow. It was a gift from the Great Ones themselves to serve as a guiding light for Ludwig, the first hunter. Ludwig believed deeply in the righteousness of the hunt and the nobility of the hunter's cause. He saw hunting as a sacred duty, a way to protect the innocent and serve the church's divine mission. Under his leadership, the Healing Church Hunters became a formal organization, divided into different types with specific roles. This wasn't the small personal operation that Gehrman had run. This was an army, a structured force designed to combat the beast scourge on a massive scale. The Healing Church Workshop replaced the old workshop as the center of hunter operations, and its methods reflected Ludwig's philosophy, strength, faith, and unwavering commitment to the cause. There were the Black Church Hunters, focused purely on eliminating beasts from Yharnam's streets. According to the Black Church set, hunters of the Healing Church are properly called clerics, and these black brethren are no exception. Black hunters constantly face the terrifying premonition of the hunt, and ironically, they find their consolation in the black of their own garb. These were the frontline warriors, the ones citizens would see fighting in the night, protecting them from the scourge. They dressed in black, a color that hid bloodstains and suited their grim work. Then, there were the White Church Hunters, clerics who combined hunting with research. The White Church set tells us, the White Church Hunters were men of the cloth who taught the divine grace of blood healing. These hunters are rather more the protectors of the church, dedicated to keeping the beastly scourge at bay, but only for the sake of the church's interests. They studied the beasts they killed to better understand the transformations and search for a cure, though cure in this context often meant finding better ways to kill or control the beasts, rather than actually reversing the transformation. Finally, there were the Hunters of Hunters, elite warriors tasked with a grim duty, hunting other hunters who had succumbed to bloodlust or transformation. Eileen the Crow, one of the few Hunters of Hunters you meet, explains their purpose. Hunters have told me about the church, about the gods and their love, but do the gods love their creations? I am a hunter of hunters. I'm here to hunt you, should you go astray. They ensured that even the protectors of Yharnam didn't become the very monsters they swore to destroy, maintaining discipline through the threat of execution. But for all the church's expanded hunting operations, for all their research and their rituals, the beast scourge continued to spread. Blood ministration remained the foundation of the church's power and influence. They couldn't stop distributing the blood without admitting that their miracle cure was causing the very plague they claimed to be fighting against. And so the hunts continued, night after night, a cyclical pattern of transformation and slaughter that seemed to have no end. The citizens received blood ministration, some transformed into beasts, hunters killed the beasts, more citizens came for blood ministration, and the cycle repeated endlessly. It was during this period of crisis that the hunter's dream came into existence. The third umbilical cord found in the abandoned workshop provides crucial information. Every infant Great One has this precursor to the umbilical cord. Every Great One loses its child and then yearns for a surrogate, and Udin, the formless Great One, is no different. To think, it was corrupted blood that began this eldritch liaison. The third umbilical cord precipitated the encounter with the pale moon, which beckoned the hunters and conceived the hunter's dream. Based on this and Gehrman's presence in the dream, it appears he made contact with a Great One, likely the moon presence, and entered into some form of contract. The exact terms remain mysterious, but the result was the creation of a pocket dimension, a dream space that existed outside normal reality. This hunter's dream was modeled after Gehrman's old workshop, the place where he had trained the first hunters, now preserved in a state of eternal twilight beneath flowers that never wilt and a sky that never changes. In the hunter's dream, the doll that Gehrman had created in Maria's likeness came to life, animated by the power of the Great One. She could speak, move, and interact with those who visited the dream, though she lacked the strong personality of the original Maria, something that caused Gehrman to resent her presence even as he was grateful not to be entirely alone. The plain doll tells us about her nature. I am a doll, here in this dream to look after you. The doll served hunters who found themselves bound to the dream, helping them grow stronger through blood echoes, speaking words of encouragement, and providing a kind presence in what would otherwise be a lonely existence. The primary function of the hunter's dream was to make hunters effectively immortal. Those contracted to the dream could die repeatedly in the waking world, only to wake up back in the dream, ready to try again. Death became temporary, an inconvenience rather than an ending. The hunter would feel the pain, experience the terror, and then find themselves back in the dream, surrounded by messages that read, "You died, but very much still alive." This made dream-bound hunters incredibly valuable for dealing with the beast scourge. They could take risks that would be suicidal for normal hunters, could learn from their deaths, could persist where others would have fallen. But this gift came with a terrible price. Gehrman discovered too late that he was trapped in the dream. He couldn't leave, couldn't return to the waking world, couldn't die properly. He was bound to serve as guide and mentor to an endless procession of hunters, watching them struggle and suffer and eventually either die permanently or escape the dream while he remained behind. His role was to be the helper, the advisor, the one who sent hunters out into Yharnam's nightmare, while he himself sat in a wheelchair in the garden, unable to participate in the hunt he had founded. In his sleep, Gehrman would cry out for help. If you find him dozing in the workshop, you can hear him pleading, "Oh, Laurence, what's taking you so long? I've grown too old for this. Of little use now, I'm afraid." And later, more desperately, "Oh, Laurence, Master Willem, somebody help me. Unshackle me, please, anybody. I've had enough of this dream. The night blocks all sight. Oh, somebody, please." These weren't the words of a willing participant, but of a prisoner, someone who had made a deal he didn't fully understand and now found himself trapped in its consequences. He calls out to the people he knew, Laurence and Willem, begging for release that will never come. The hunter's dream became another tool in the church's arsenal against the beast scourge, but it also represented something more sinister. It was evidence that the healing church had successfully made contact with the Great Ones and convinced one to enter into a binding contract. The moon presence, the Great One that hosted the dream, had its own agenda. It used the dream to draw hunters into Yharnam, to combat other Great Ones, to serve purposes that mortal minds couldn't fully comprehend. Gehrman and the hunters who followed were pawns in a cosmic game they barely understood. As the years passed and the beast scourge continued its relentless spread, the truth about Yharnam's situation became increasingly difficult to hide. The hunts grew more frequent and more violent. Entire sections of the city had to be quarantined. The church implemented stricter controls, both on who could receive blood ministration and on information about the transformations. They couldn't admit that the very blood they had built their institution upon was causing the plague, so they blamed the victims instead. The church's propaganda grew more elaborate and more desperate. They preached that the beasts were profane, that they were tests of the faithful, that those who transformed simply hadn't prayed hard enough or believed sincerely enough. This messaging served multiple purposes. It maintained the church's authority by framing the plague as a spiritual rather than medical problem. It kept people coming for blood ministration by suggesting that the truly faithful had nothing to fear. And it justified the increasingly brutal methods used to contain the scourge, making citizens view the transformed as less than human, as monsters that deserved only death. Vicar Amelia's prayer, which you can hear if you eavesdrop before fighting her, encapsulates this propaganda perfectly. Seek the old blood. Let us pray to partake in communion. Let us partake in communion and feast upon the old blood. Our thirst for blood satiates us, soothes our fears. Seek the old blood, but beware the frailty of men. Their wills are weak, minds young. The foul beasts will dangle nectar and lure the meek into the depths. Remain wary of the frailty of men. Their wills are weak, minds young. She's telling people to use the blood, but blaming them for being too weak to handle it properly. A perfect example of the church's doublespeak. But beneath the propaganda and the increasingly desperate measures, the truth was becoming apparent to those willing to see it. The pattern was undeniable. Those who received the most blood ministration, who had the deepest communion with the old blood, became the most terrible beasts when they finally transformed. Clerics of the healing church, when they succumbed to the scourge, didn't become ordinary beasts. They became cleric beasts, massive monstrosities of incredible power and fury. The Sword Hunter badge explains, one of the badges crafted by the healing church. The silver sword is a symbol of a church hunter. Ludwig was the first of many healing church hunters to come, many of whom were clerics. As it was, clerics transformed into the most hideous beasts. Laurence himself, the first vicar, the founder of the healing church, eventually fell victim to the very scourge his institution had caused. Despite his promise to Willem that he would fear the old blood, despite his certainty that he could control and harness its power, Laurence transformed into the first cleric beast. The transformation must have been horrific, watching himself lose his humanity and become the very thing he had spent his life trying to combat and control. He was killed, though by whom the records don't say, and his body was brought to the Grand Cathedral, where his skull was placed on an altar and venerated as a holy relic. Laurence's skull tells us, Skull of Laurence, first vicar of the healing church. In reality, he became the first cleric beast, and his human skull only exists within the nightmare. The skull is a symbol of Laurence's past and what he failed to protect. He is destined to seek his skull, but even if he found it, it could never restore his memories. It's a tragic end for someone who believed so strongly in his vision, who thought he could use the old blood without falling prey to its corruption. But even death and transformation couldn't free Laurence from the consequences of his choices. The curse placed upon the hunters by the Fishing Hamlet pulled him into the hunter's nightmare, a twisted reflection of reality where hunters who became drunk with blood were condemned to hunt for eternity. In the nightmare, Laurence exists as a burning cleric beast, flames consuming his form in what appears to be an eternal punishment. He tears himself apart in his anguish, his lower body destroyed, reduced to crawling across the ground while lava flows from his wounds. The flames that engulf him could represent the fire of his ambition, the destruction his choices wrought upon Yharnam, or perhaps the literal burning that consumed parts of the city during the beast scourge. Whatever their symbolic meaning, they create one of the most disturbing boss fights in the game. Laurence burns and bleeds lava, his rage and pain manifested as flames that never stop, wounds that never heal. Its suffering made eternal, punishment that never ends. The fate of the other church leaders was similarly grim. Ludwig, the noble hunter who believed so deeply in the righteousness of his cause, eventually transformed into a horrific beast himself. His transformation resulted in a grotesque four-legged monstrosity, though whether he literally merged with his mount or simply took on a horse-like form remains open to interpretation. What is certain is that he lost almost all of his humanity, becoming a slavering beast that attacks with mindless fury. But there's a moment during the boss fight that's absolutely heartbreaking. When Ludwig reaches half health, he notices the holy moonlight sword embedded in the ground nearby. The moment he grasps it, something changes. The beast's movements become more controlled, more deliberate. The attacks gain purpose rather than being simple animal rage. And if you're wearing church attire, Ludwig will actually speak to you. His voice is broken and pained, but the words are lucid. Good hunter, have you seen the thread of light? Just a hair, a fleeting thing, yet I clung to it, steeped as I was in the stench of blood and beasts. I never wanted to know what it really was. Really, I didn't. This is Ludwig regaining just enough awareness to question everything he believed. You can respond to him, and your response determines how he dies. If you tell him his church and hunters were honorable, he finds peace, thanking you and passing on with dignity. If you tell him the truth, that the church became corrupt and the hunters became monsters, he's devastated, dying in despair. The reassurance he receives seems to bring him peace, allowing him to die with some measure of dignity, despite the horror of what he had become. It's a moment of genuine tragedy in a game full of horror. Mikolash and the school of Mensis met their end in the nightmare they created. The Mensis ritual succeeded in one sense. It did make contact with a great one. But that contact drove the scholars mad, left them trapped in a nightmare of their own making, pursued by manifestations of their fears and failures. Mikolash himself can be encountered in the nightmare, raving about eyes and insight, spouting fragments of cosmic truth mixed with delusion. When you chase him through the nightmare of Mensis, he runs and hides, laughing and shouting about the secrets he's discovered. Ah, Kos, or some say Kosm, do you hear our prayers? As you once did for the vacuous Ram, grant us eyes, plant eyes on our brains, to cleanse our beastly idiocy. He seems almost joyful in his madness, laughing as he discusses the horrible revelations he's uncovered, unable or unwilling to see that he's destroyed himself and his followers in pursuit of knowledge that no human mind was meant to contain. The choir, in their upper cathedral ward, continued their work until the very end. They studied ebrietas, performed their experiments, sought their communion with the cosmos. But when their vicar, Amelia, transformed into a cleric beast during a prayer in the Grand Cathedral, it marked the beginning of the end for the upper echelons of the church. The beasts invaded even the upper cathedral ward, the holiest and most secure part of the church's domain. The choir's secrets were exposed, their experiments revealed. The orphanage they had used for their transformation studies stood as testament to their crimes. And throughout all of this, the cycles continued. The hunts, the transformations, the desperate attempts to maintain order and control. The citizens of Yharnam, those who hadn't yet transformed, huddled behind locked doors, forming mobs to hunt down anyone who showed signs of the scourge. They trusted no one, not even each other, because the transformations could happen to anyone at any time. Paranoia and fear consumed the city as thoroughly as the beast plague, turning neighbor against neighbor, creating an atmosphere where violence and suspicion were the only rational responses to the nightmare unfolding around them. It's into this nightmare that the player character arrives, seeking something called pale blood. The nature of pale blood remains one of the game's enduring mysteries, but the search for it brings you to Yharnam. You're brought to Iosefka's clinic, run by a mysterious figure who administers a blood transfusion, binding you to the hunter's dream. The blood minister says, "You've found yourself a hunter. Whatever happens, you may think it all a mere bad dream." From that moment, you're caught up in the hunt, tasked with cleansing Yharnam's streets of beasts, with discovering the source of the plague, with unraveling mysteries that stretch back through generations of hubris and cosmic horror. Your journey takes you through the various districts of Yharnam, each revealing more of the city's dark history. Central Yharnam shows you the mob mentality, the citizens who have turned violent in their fear. The cathedral ward reveals the power and corruption of the healing church. Old Yharnam demonstrates the consequences of the church's brutal solutions. Yahargul exposes the ritual madness of the school of Mensis. And the upper cathedral ward unveils the choir's experiments and their captive great one. As you progress through Yharnam, the true nature of the night's hunt is gradually revealed. Killing Rom, the vacuous spider, a great one that was hiding the true state of reality, causes the moon to turn red and the real horror to become visible. Suddenly, you can see the amygdala clinging to the sides of buildings, cosmic entities that have been watching the city all along. They've always been there, invisible to those without sufficient insight, observing humanity's struggles with alien indifference. The ritual being performed by the school of Mensis becomes apparent, its effects rippling out across Yharnam. Queen Yharnam appears, weeping beneath the blood moon, mourning her stolen child. The true scope of what's happening becomes clear. This isn't just a beast plague. This is a cosmic event, a convergence of great ones drawn by rituals and cries from across dimensions. The revelation that comes from piercing the veil is that the beast scourge, the hunts, the entire nightmare of Yharnam appears to have been orchestrated or at least exploited by the great ones for their own inscrutable purposes. Based on the sequence of events and the moon presence's actions, it seems this entity wanted someone to eliminate Murgo, to silence the child's cries that were drawing other great ones to Yharnam. The school of Mensis's ritual needed to be stopped, and the moon presence appears to have been using hunters to accomplish this goal. Every hunter bound to the dream, Gehrman included, was ultimately serving the agenda of a cosmic entity that viewed humans as tools. The endgame of Bloodborne presents you with choices that will determine the fate of both the hunter and Yharnam itself. When you silence Murgo by defeating the wet nurse, when the child's cries finally stop and the message "Nightmare Slain" appears, you return to the hunter's dream to find Gehrman waiting for you in the garden. He stands from his wheelchair, fully mobile for the first time, and offers you a choice that will define your ending. Good hunter, you have done well. The night is near its end. Now I will show you mercy. You will die, forget the dream, and awake under the morning sun. You will be freed from this terrible hunter's dream. His offer is genuine. He wants to release you from the curse that has bound him for so long. If you accept, he beheads you with his burial blade in what he sees as an act of mercy, releasing you from service while he remains trapped to guide the next hunter. You wake up in Yharnam as the sun rises, the first time you've seen daylight since arriving. The nightmare is over for you, though it continues for Gehrman and for Yharnam itself. If you refuse Gehrman's offer, he sighs with disappointment, but accepts your decision. Dear, oh dear, what was it? The hunt? The blood? Or the horrible dream? Oh, it doesn't matter. It always comes down to the hunter's helper to clean up after these sort of messes. He transforms his weapon and fights you himself, wielding all his considerable skill as the first hunter. Defeating him proves your strength, shows that you've surpassed even the founder of the hunt. But victory over Gehrman doesn't free you. Instead, the moon presence descends, the great one that has been orchestrating events from behind the scenes. It's a grotesque creature, pale and skeletal, with a face that seems almost placental. It attempts to consume you, to bind you to its service as it bound Gehrman. Without sufficient insight, without understanding the true nature of what you face, you become the new host of the hunter's dream, trapped in Gehrman's wheelchair while he finally finds release. The doll pushes you through the garden, and you've taken his place, becoming the next guide for hunters, bound to serve the moon presence for untold years. But there is a third path, one that requires consuming 1/3 of umbilical cord items found throughout the game. These cords are remnants of Great One's children, items imbued with eyes and cosmic power. One is found with the abandoned workshop's cord, one can be obtained from Ariana's infant, one from Iosefka's clinic, and one from defeating Murgo's wet nurse. The description tells us, every infant Great One has this precursor to the umbilical cord, used to gain insight and, so they say, eyes on the inside, although no one remembers what that truly entails. Consuming them grants insight, lining your brain with eyes, allowing you to resist the moon presence's attempt to bind you. When the Great One tries to consume you, you resist, standing firm against its power, and then you fight it, the being that created the hunter's dream, the cosmic entity that has been manipulating events in Yharnam. The battle is surreal and disturbing, fighting a Great One in the garden of the hunter's dream while the doll watches. Defeating the moon presence triggers the game's true ending. Your hunter doesn't become trapped in the dream or sent back to the waking world. Instead, you transform, becoming an infant Great One, a slug-like creature that the doll cradles gently. She speaks words of comfort and hope. Good hunter, you have come. Farewell, good hunter. May you find your worth in the waking world. The implications of this transformation remain ambiguous. You've achieved a form of transcendence, becoming something beyond human, though whether this represents victory or simply a different kind of imprisonment is left to interpretation. As for Yharnam itself, the city's fate remains uncertain regardless of which ending you achieve. The beast scourge doesn't simply end when the nightmare is slain, or the hunter escapes or transforms. The old blood still flows through the veins of Yharnam's citizens. The healing church's infrastructure remains, even if its leadership has fallen to madness or transformation. The cycles that have defined Yharnam for generations, the pattern of blood ministration leading to transformation, leading to hunts, leading to more blood ministration, these don't break easily. Perhaps other hunters will continue the work, bound to new dreams or operating independently. Perhaps the citizens will finally understand the danger of the old blood and cease using it, though breaking an addiction that's become fundamental to their society seems unlikely. Perhaps the city will fall entirely, consumed by beasts and madness, becoming like old Yharnam or the lost civilization of Laurence, a cautionary tale for future generations. Or perhaps Yharnam will endure, scarred and changed but surviving, maintaining its hunts and its blood rituals because they're all the city knows. What is certain is that Yharnam stands as a monument to humanity's greatest failing and greatest strength. The failing is hubris, the belief that we can control forces beyond our comprehension, that we can commune with gods without consequence, that the pursuit of knowledge and power justifies any cost. Every step of Yharnam's decline was driven by someone convinced they knew better, that they could succeed where others failed, that they were special enough or smart enough or faithful enough to handle what they were attempting. Byrgenwerth thought they could study the Great Ones safely. Laurence thought he could harness the Old Blood's power without falling prey to its corruption. The Healing Church thought they could maintain control of the blood ministration and the transformations it caused. The School of Mensis thought they could perform their ritual and make contact with higher beings without losing themselves in the process. The Choir thought they could experiment with creating kin without moral consequence. Every faction, every individual who played a role in Yharnam's fall, was motivated by the certainty that they were different, that the rules that applied to others didn't apply to them. But humanity's strength shows itself in the hunters, in people like Jura who found compassion for the beasts, in Lady Maria who threw down her weapon when she understood what she had done, in the various NPCs you meet who try to help each other despite the horror surrounding them. Gilbert, the sick man in central Yharnam who gives you advice, and the flame sprayer, despite slowly transforming himself. Ariana, who offers you blood even as she doesn't fully understand what's happening to her. Eileen, who continues her work as a hunter of hunters despite her age and the danger. These small acts of kindness and humanity persist even in Yharnam's darkest hour. The player character represents this strength most completely. By the end of Bloodborne, you have faced down entities that exist beyond human comprehension, and either freed yourself from divine manipulation or transcended humanity entirely. You refused to simply be another victim, another beast, another tool for the Great Ones to use. Whether you chose to wake from the dream, replace Gehrman, or become an infant Great One, you made that choice yourself. You weren't transformed against your will or manipulated without your knowledge. You faced the truth of Yharnam and decided your own fate. Yharnam's story is one of ambition and consequence, of the price paid for reaching toward divinity. It's a story about cycles, about how societies repeat the same mistakes in different forms, about how the pursuit of transcendence often leads to degradation. The Pthumerians fell to the beast scourge. Laurence fell to the beast scourge. And Yharnam, despite having the examples of these fallen civilizations to learn from, despite having Willem's warnings and Laurence's promise to fear the blood, fell to the same fate. The city's Gothic architecture, its layers built upon layers, its tombs and cathedrals and workshops, all of it reflects this cyclical nature. Yharnam was built on top of Pthumeru, literally constructing a new civilization on the ruins of the old. And just as the Pthumerians sealed themselves in their labyrinths to guard the sleeping Great Ones, Yharnam created its own sealed spaces, its quarantine districts, its hidden research facilities, where terrible secrets were locked away from public knowledge. The patterns repeat because humanity doesn't learn, or can't learn, or won't learn. But perhaps that's too cynical a reading. Perhaps the true message of Yharnam's story is more nuanced. Yes, the pursuit of forbidden knowledge led to disaster. Yes, communion with the Great Ones corrupted and destroyed those who sought it. Yes, the cycles continued and humanity fell prey to the same temptations again and again. But humanity also produced individuals capable of recognizing these patterns, capable of choosing differently, capable of sacrificing themselves to help others or standing against the very institutions that gave them power. The hunter you play as can choose to accept Gehrman's mercy and wake from the nightmare, rejecting the endless cycle of the hunt. Or they can choose to fight, to resist both Gehrman and the moon presence, to refuse to be manipulated by cosmic entities. Or they can ascend to become something new, something that might break the pattern entirely. These choices matter. They represent agency in a universe that seems designed to strip away human agency, the ability to determine your own fate even when facing gods. Yharnam, in the end, is a city that asked the wrong questions and paid a terrible price for the answers it received. It sought to cure disease and instead created a plague. It sought to commune with gods and instead became their playthings. It sought transcendence and found only transformation into beasts. But within that tragedy, within the nightmare of Yharnam's streets and the horror of its revelations, there remains the possibility of understanding, of learning from these mistakes, of perhaps, eventually, finding a way forward that doesn't repeat the cycles of the past. The blood moon hangs low over Yharnam, and the hunt continues. It has continued for generations, and may continue for generations more. Beasts still prowl the streets, the great ones still watch from their cosmic perches, and hunters still venture into the nightmare, seeking pale blood, seeking answers, seeking an end to the endless night. Some will fall to madness or transformation, some will be trapped in dreams, and some, perhaps, will find their way through to the other side, changed but not broken, enlightened but not destroyed. This is the complete story of Yharnam, a tale of blood and beasts, of hunters and hunted, of gods and the humans who dared to reach for them. It's a story that begins in ancient Pthumerian tombs and stretches across generations of ambition and failure. It's a story of a city that should serve as warning but instead becomes a beacon, drawing in the desperate and the curious, the sick and the seeking. It's a story that hasn't ended, may never end, because as long as there's suffering that needs a cure, as long as there's human ambition that seeks transcendence, there will be another Yharnam, another disaster born from the best intentions and the worst hubris. And somewhere, in a dream that exists outside of time, an old hunter sits in a garden of white flowers, bound to a wheelchair, waiting for the next hunter to arrive. He'll guide them, as he's guided countless others, knowing that most will fall, that some will escape, and that he will remain. The night and the dream are long, but the hunt continues, and perhaps that's all that matters. Perhaps in the continuing struggle, in the refusal to give up even in the face of cosmic horror, humanity finds its truest strength and its most profound tragedy. Fear the old blood, good hunter. But don't let that fear stop you from seeking the truth, from fighting against the nightmare, from choosing your own path through the darkness. Yharnam's story is a warning, yes, but it's also a challenge. Can you do better? Can you learn from the mistakes of the past? Can you face the great ones and maintain your humanity, or transcend it on your own terms rather than theirs? The answer lies in the hunt, in the blood-soaked streets and cosmic revelations, in the choices you make when confronted with impossible decisions. Yharnam awaits, eternal and unchanging in its nightmare state, ready to test another hunter, ready to reveal its secrets to those brave or foolish enough to seek them. The city will stand as long as there are those who reach for power they don't understand, who seek cures without considering consequences, who believe themselves exempt from the patterns of history. May the good blood guide your way, hunter, and may you find what you seek in the depths of Yharnam's nightmare. Just remember, when you're knee-deep in blood and surrounded by beasts, when the cosmic truth threatens to shatter your sanity, when you stand before gods and must choose your fate, this is what Yharnam has always been. A test, a warning, a nightmare made manifest. And your choices, however small they seem, matter more than you know. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the lore of Yharnam, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. There's so much more to explore in Bloodborne and other games, so many stories waiting to be told, so many nightmares waiting to be understood. Join me as we continue to unravel the mysteries of these incredible worlds, one video at a time. Until next time, good hunter, may you find your worth in the waking world.